Chris here is going to be presenting on some lessons learned in leadership. He's a part of the CHA DevOps meetup, and he's got great ideas. Really looking forward to hearing from him, and I'll let him introduce himself. Thanks.
Appreciate it, Alex. All right, as Alex said, I am local, so I'm really excited to be here as part of the first DevOps Days in Chattanooga. I'm also kind of focused on the security side. I'm on the board of directors of our local ISSA chapter. I do work from my house, remote. I was telling the guys at lunch, I thought it would be fun and interesting to do a lightning talk on all the weird things that people do when they work from their house, remote, as an opportunity. I think you can all, those who do manage that will understand. But so just a little bit about myself. The title of this talk is Lessons Learned in DevOps Leadership. I currently work for a cybersecurity company out of DC called Cofense. We're a phishing mitigation company. We work on response and automation to email phishing campaigns. I run the platform engineering and SaaS application team there. Prior to that, I worked at another cybersecurity company called FireEye for about 5 years. I was a director of site reliability engineering there. So I've done this for a little bit, and what I wanted to really kind of relay to this group is just kind of talk through some of the things that I've learned over the past several years in the whole DevOps space in running SRE teams and prod eng teams and working with developers and so forth. A couple things before we get started. I love to read. Probably my interest from a reading standpoint. I love reading about tech. I love reading about business. I love reading about health. And one of the things that I've picked up in the past few years is I love reading about the intersection of tech or of business, tech, and health. And that has been, and therefore I want to get started with a quote, which is from this book by David Rock, Your Brain at Work. It says, leaders who want to drive change more effectively may want to practice becoming more intelligent about their inner world as a first step. A great way to do this is discover more about your own brain. So, when I was working more on the engineering front and trying to understand how systems work, it was interesting to me to really dig in. You really had to have an understanding of both the application and the system when you were trying to actually troubleshoot and build systems effectively. And as I moved into management, it was important for me to understand kind of taking that same type of approach analogously and moving it over to the human body and to the human brain. And so that's where I came up with this, really was impacted by this book, Your Brain at Work. And part of that book is relevant because they have this model here. It's called SCARF, referred to by the acronym of SCARF. And it's a model for understanding your social threats and rewards. And there's 5 components of it: status, certainty, autonomy, relatedness, and fairness. And those 5 areas are really a way of grouping your body's physical response to maybe more social issues. So if you have a away response, for example, if your status is threatened, your brain will likely have a threatened response, and you're going to probably trigger a cortisol hit inside of you, which is going to impact your ability to be productive, to collaborate, to communicate with others, to creatively solve problems. And if the other direction, where your status is enhanced, where you feel like, hey, things are going well for me, those same type of issues will be pushed in the other direction, such that, hey, you're much more effective at collaborating, you're much more effective at communicating, your problem-solving ability goes up. And that's really where, and as I thought about putting this talk together, I'm saying, how am I going to have basically a grab bag of lessons learned over the past several years of managing operations and engineering teams? How am I going to bring that together? So I thought about doing a little bit something different with this presentation and said, hey, you know what? I'm going to basically bucketize my lessons learned into this SCARF model and see what happens. And so what you're going to see in this presentation is me attempting to take the lessons learned from leading and reading over the past years in managing DevOps and DevOps-related initiatives, putting them together and putting them under one of these 5 categories. And at the end, I'm going to give you guys one question I use frequently with my team and others that will kind of bring all of these together. So with that being said, I want to start with status. Status is that category where we have to feel it is a a general understanding of how we relate to other people. Where in the social hierarchy are we? How does that actually make a difference from us in what we're doing at work? Now, there's different ways to approach that, and I think status it can be very toxic because it can translate into maybe more of a power play. Where do I fit on the corporate ladder, so to speak? However, there's also very good ways of understanding status that if you approach it effectively, both with yourself and other people, it can be an excellent driver in how to actually reward behavior and influence others. So let me give you an example. I actually just brought this with me. This is a card I received. This card's like 4 years old. And I asked myself, why did I keep a card? I'm not a pack rat, but if you guys, you're not going to be able to read it, but if you can see it, it's got a bunch of handwritten, there's a handwritten note at the top. At the time I was at FireEye, the CTO of the company at the end of the year took the time for I think a lot of people who are on an initiative and took the time to actually write out handwritten, not just Merry Christmas, Happy New Year type of thing, but thank you for your contributions. You did X, Y, and Z for me over this year. I really appreciate that. I look forward to making next year much more effective. Now, the reason that relates to status is because that was a capability for, I think, the CTO, and he knew this, to encourage and uplift an individual's status without bringing anybody else down. And that's so effective for us because the way I would take a lesson from this is that we as leaders, for those around us, for those that work for us, can actually increase the status of people by being specific. And the way that we do that is we have to be engaged. We have to understand what everybody else in the organization is doing. And we can communicate being specific, saying, hey, look, thank you for your contributions and how you instrumented the application. Thank you for your contributions on how you started scaling that system. Thank you for that particular development project that you did. See, we have, I think the way that we as leaders in DevOps or even anything, and this is maybe a general engineering or maybe business lesson, that we can be effective as leaders is by really identifying our own niche and everybody else's niche. Because you know what? Not everybody is going to have people reporting to them. Some people are, and that's perfectly okay, are going to be individual contributors. So you want to avoid that, you want to avoid the where do you fit on the social ladder, where do you fit in the organizational hierarchy, and instead approach it from where they're at as a niche standpoint. How have they specifically contributed to the individual project that you have at hand? And I have found that effective by times I spend in one-on-ones, by times I can call people out in Scrum, by times I can take one of my lessons learned was after realizing that at the end of the year, it's like 20, 25 people, I send emails to everybody saying, hey, look, this is what you did last year. Thank you for doing that. And those are the ways that we can build people's status, trigger that positive reward in their minds, and really let them have a comfort level in working with you going forward. So besides status, I want to ask, we'll get this clicker working here. This is the concept of certainty. Now, people in general crave certainty, a certain degree of certainty. We have a general, I would say, pushback from change. Anytime change comes up, whether it's organizational change, technology change, familial change, whatever else it is, certainty is what people crave. And if you understand this as a leader in DevOps and engineering, I think you can drive some understanding. But what I found difficult about certainty, and this is probably true for any technology business, is the question, how do you produce certainty in an agile and a fast-moving world? How do you actually go about doing that? What are the things that you have to do to produce certainty with your staff and with your team to actually get people comfortable? Because by definition, if you're doing DevOps, if you're actually driving change, the requirements are going to change quickly. The business needs are going to change quickly. So what's going to happen there? But before I want to dig into the how of how we produce certainty, I just want to kind of take a pit stop quickly and ask the who. And I think this is probably something we should drive home in our minds is this, that if you are a leader, whether in DevOps or anything else, people will look to you for certainty. Full stop. If you are a leader, people will look to you for certainty. When I took over the platform engineering and SaaS teams at my current gig at Cofense 4 months ago, I did this thing where I would go ask people. It's like, what are you looking for from me? What is your expectations from me? If you were me, what would you be doing? And I got 2 responses. The top 2 responses are, look, we want focus and we want standards. And to me, what that's telling me is everybody in that organization was hungry for having some type of consistency, some type of certainty in their work. I think most people get the fact that things move quickly, and that's great. But there has to be something to really ground us in there. And certainty providing that was what I was hearing, because too much uncertainty causes us to have basically a threat response. We're incapable of processing the changes around us, and what we end up doing is clamming up as leaders and clamming up as people. So the way that I approach this is this concept of over-communication. The way that, it's been said, there's an old marketing adage that if you need to repeat something 7 times, people need to hear something, the adage like they need to hear about your product 7 times before they're willing to buy it. If you are a leader and you're trying to communicate things, you are responsible for over-communicating everything to that organization. And especially in the DevOps space. And if you're doing that, I've been spending a lot of time with infrastructure teams doing configuration management. And usually we're a layer removed from the business value. And that's what's important, I have found, even doubling down on this, is over-communicating business value to the team. Do you have any idea why the feature or function that you're working on is important? Do you have any idea what that's going to do for the business and their bottom line? And you as a leader are responsible for that. I have found that this is something that, it's funny because you as a leader, you assume, well, I've got this vision in my mind, technically, I understand what we're doing, and therefore everybody else might understand. One of the big mistakes I made as a beginning of leadership is, you know what, they don't understand. And if you're not going to over-communicate it, you're not going to be able to effectively get your team all in the same place, and we're not going to run in the same direction. So talking about that, some other things that I have found necessary for over-communication are team accomplishments, being your team's cheerleader. You ever think about how quickly we forget what our successes are? And having somebody there to remind you of them is so critically important. Because we do. I mean, we think about, oh, well, that was yesterday. What have you done for me lately is usually the outside in, but our own brains work that way too, don't they? What have you done for me lately? Being a leader is reminding the team of where you started, where you've gone, and what their future is in the vision. And then also technical architecture and decisions. This is something that, despite all kinds of documentation, there is no limit on times you can over-communicate technical and architecture decisions. Driving that stuff home, your process and your standards. Now moving on to autonomy. This should be no surprise, particularly to a room full of engineers and people in leadership, is that people have a desire to control their own little space, right? People want to be able to do things. The reward response is for them is for you and anybody else to say, hey, I've controlled my little patch here. I've done something. And the threat response comes from something like micromanagement, where somebody's pulling the puppet strings above you saying, hey, you need to do X, Y, and Z. So autonomy is critical, and being able to actually influence that and giving people the ability to do things and take dominion over what they've actually have, I think is important. So another hugely influential book to me is this book called Peopleware. And let me just read this quote for you. It says, those people who were attracted to such areas years ago by the newness, the lack of order, feel nostalgic fondness for the days when everything wasn't so awfully mechanical. That quote comes from a chapter that they have dedicated on a topic called chaos. And this chapter was just mind-blowing for me because they talked about chaos as a finite resource. In other words, it's basically, chaos is a pie in an organization. And the mistake that you are most likely to make as a new technical leader is that you get this newfound freedom. Well, I can put my mark. I can make all the technical decisions in the world. And I made that mistake. And then what you not end up doing is letting all of your team take those decisions. And the reality is your team will make decisions better than you are when you're getting consensus. And so you as a leader should think about that. The chaos, the white space, your lack of maturity in tech and process, they're not bad things. They're opportunities for you to allow other people on the team, other people in the organization to take and do autonomy and trigger those positive responses. Don't hoard them for yourself. Now I'm going to talk just a little bit about that relationship between autonomy and chaos and how it's actually effectively. One of the things, I have not worked for any of the, I would call, top-tier engineering organizations, something like FANG, Facebook, Apple, Netflix, Google. I've been what I would say my career at this point, middle-grade engineering organizations. But from a recruiting standpoint, we've had the capability, we've hired SREs at some point from maybe Twitter or LinkedIn or Google or whatever, and I would be very upfront with the team and some other really kind of talented people coming in and say, look, We're not top tier yet. We are on a DevOps journey. We are progressing towards some type of mature state. So let me be honest with you. This is where I think we have problems. You're probably used to more maturity than what you're seeing today and what you're going to walk into organization. And if you have my commitment as a leader that I'm going to give you that ability to actually execute and go out and put your stamp of autonomy on this. But you have to realize where we're at. So doing that and realizing it's also an opportunity for continuous improvement is something that's actually has helped me understanding that autonomy is for talented engineers and otherwise, and kind of parceling out your chaos is important. So let's talk about relatedness. Relatedness is probably the hardest thing for me because I am not necessarily a very social person. I'm probably an introvert, and this is difficult for me to get over. And yet at the same time, realizing that when you're in leadership, you're not necessarily just looking about making systems work, you're looking about making people work together as a team. And the relatedness aspect is, I ask this question, how do you build relatedness between you and your team members? So I'm going to be appreciative here. I'm going to tie this back to technical things. But let me ask this question. How do you build relatedness between you and your team members? Particularly, I've worked on virtual or remote teams for the past 6-ish years. So how do you go and do that? And kind of a follow-up question, how are you connected? How are you connected between you and your team members? People have a desire and relatedness to feel close. That social connection will, again, trigger a positive response. They will be better communicators, better collaborators. They'll have more innovative problem solving. The productivity of the team will go up when they feel related. So answering that question is really important. And I would answer it just quite simply this way, by having a shared commitment to a common craft. We, I'm now in production engineering, site reliability engineering, whether the development folks here are doing any type of software development, we should all have a common craft. There should be a shared commitment. And to be putting a different way, we should have a shared technical competency. That's what brings us and brings the team together. There's a lot of other things as well, but you as a technical leader need to basically influence that and drive that home. Let me give you an example from research. I'm going to quote here in a minute just a woman by the name of Amanda Goodall. She does management research in business. And this is what she found. She found the top correlating factor between employee job satisfaction was the boss's technical competency. Let me say that just one more time so it sinks in. The thing most influential to an employee's job satisfaction is their boss's technical competency. And when she was asked about that later, this is what she said in an interview. She said, interestingly enough, all of them report they communicate better with an expert boss, the morale is better, and their performance assessments are more accurate. So yes, expertise does make a better manager. If we think about that, how does that influence what we do? How does that how do we stay on top of things? And that should dictate kind of where we're coming from an approach standpoint. So the idea is here that if we are going to maintain or keep up with our technical competency, we have to keep reading. We have to keep coding. We have to keep pulling on-call shifts. I think that's so important as a leader that you're in there with the trenches with your team. Maybe you're not doing critical path, and maybe the one caveat I would say this, you should keep coding, but don't code in critical path. Do your MR and try to step out, because if the business is relying on you to get something done, it's probably not that, you don't want to do that. But you should be able to stay in the code base and understand what's going on. And I'm going to put out one warning here, and this is from probably one of my favorite technical presentations ever. Brian Cantrell at least was the SVP of Joint and Engineering. He gives a big warning flag here. He says, the formerly technical manager often retains the confidence of an engineer, but loses the humility that is forced upon an engineer who must get a complicated system to work. Okay, he goes through it in this presentation, he goes through a taxonomy. These are the different types of managers. The most dangerous manager is the one who is formally technical, because they lose all ability to be humble. Their empathy is essentially thrown out the window and they're overconfident. So what ends up happening is they basically influence their team and push them. And he has a good section in there about non-technical management eventually devolves into time-based dates, just basically march to the sea type of things. So really good warning there. It should be another influence for us to stay technical and stay focused as leaders. So let's talk about fairness. This is the last one on SCARF here. I think I'm doing pretty good on time here. Fairness. What is fairness? Fairness is this idea that people have, what is the equity of the exchange between other human beings and perception? I think fairness is probably one of the most, if it's not, it's at least in the top two, it's probably the most powerful influence that we have here. Fairness could not even impact you. You could see a lack of fairness between two people outside of yourself, and you can go and be willing to die for that. There's a lot of socioeconomic struggles that we have at this point. Fairness is something that evokes such a strong response in people that it really drives life or death in some cases in terms of how you're determining your actions. And we should remember that because that actually influences the workplace, right? Lack of fairness in the workplace is pretty serious. Now, let me give you an example for, at least in the dev operations space. I have found this, at least with teams and interactions that I have, is you have the thing that DevOps tried to address early on is that you have devs incentivized with one set of things, which is I want to ship functions and features. You have ops incentivized with another completely different set, which is I want to maintain system stability. And devs are doing things which are probably causing conflict with the operations team. And that conflict caused a lack of trust between the teams. Where you have a lack of trust, you have a lack of fairness. And that's where a lot of the conflict came about. And this is, there's a lot of different ways to solve this. One of the ways to solve this is, well, we should have, at the end of the day, you need to say, I care about a shared responsibility for the systems that I'm build. I've seen the quote up there from Warner several times today, is this, if you build it, you run it type of thing. And the approach that some teams take is like, hey, I'm going to combine my dev teams, I'm going to combine my ops teams, we're going to have one product team. That may or may not work. I think that's interesting. I'm going to quote from the DevOps handbook. Shout out to John here who talked earlier. He says, we can also achieve our desired DevOps outcomes through functional orientation as long as everyone in the value stream views customer and organizational outcomes as a shared goal, regardless of where they reside in the organization. When I thought about that, putting people in embedded teams is not going to fix other cultural issues. It might help, but if you don't share organizational value, if you don't understand that, really fairness is built on that concept or that idea as like, okay, what am I doing? What are my roles and responsibilities? Am I staying within my lane? We all kind of talk through these things and say, the worst thing you could say is it's not my job. Well, that might be true, but the reality is everybody is thinking, is that my job? And if it's not my job and somebody else is either doing it or not doing it, that fairness trigger is put in there. And so having a kind of common collaboration and understanding of what and where something is in terms of the organizational goals is critical. Going back to over-communication, you as a leader need to over-communicate what the business values are, how your team is contributing, what your roles and responsibilities are to deliver business value. So I want to say that this from a lessons learned standpoint. Lack of fairness festers in an organization. Another good book I read on this topic talked about lack of trust in an organization. People's brain, your brain and the people around you, their brain, will do this. If they detect a fairness gap in the organization, they will spend mental cycles to reconcile that gap in their own mind in lieu of solving business problems. So you might say, life goes on. We just, that sucks. It's unfair. We're moving on. The business is going on. The reality is that your team is less productive because they're spending mental cycles trying to figure out, how do I reconcile the fact that such and such got a raise, such and such got promoted, such and such dev shipped this feature and is not on call, and their feature is causing my pager to go off at 2 a.m. in the morning. That stuff matters. And you as a leader, we all need to step up and say, you know what? I'm dealing with that conflict, because if you don't deal with that conflict, its ability to fester inside of that team will cause to lose cycles, and eventually you have what that Peopleware book calls teamicide, and lack of fairness. And then at the same time, keeping everybody focused. If the team is not focused on their goals, they're going to look for those type of things to kind of get hung up on. So address issues head on. Another really good book is called The Advantage. I would recommend it. It talks about how important conflict is in dealing with conflict constructively. Really influence management and thought process there. So I'm going to just kind of finish up with the one question. This is kind of like a bonus question I often talk to the team about. It addresses a lot of different things. I say it all the time in one-on-ones. I think it at least gets 4 out of 5 or most of the 5 different pieces of scarf that are out there today. And that question is simply this. What one thing are we not doing as a team that is completely within our power to do to help the business achieve its goals? Sometimes you get one-on-one sessions or you get with team sessions and people are venting. They're like, I wish we're not, the org's not doing this, the org's not doing it, we should be getting this done, we should be doing this other thing. And what I've asked the team is this, and I turn that around on them. So, okay, that's fair enough. I get the fact that finance is causing issues. I get the fact that dev is not doing what they need to do. I get the fact that compliance is a complete pain in the butt and they don't understand the tech stack that we're dealing with. But let's stop for a second. What's one thing that we are not doing as a team that we could be doing that's completely within our power to do to help the business achieve its goals? You're striking the status rewards response there because that individual is now saying, I'm empowered to make a decision. My opinion is valuable to you as a manager, as a leader. You're striking the certainty because if it's completely within your power to do and you decide to do it, you can go execute on that. You're striking the autonomy because, again, the team has the ability to go execute, and you're asking this person to take a problem that they choose and put a solution in place to do that. Relatedness and fairness are kind of driving in onto the team goals and so forth. So I think I'm pretty good time-wise. That's my presentation. A lot of interesting things. I wish I could tell you that I learned all this up front before getting into leadership. Almost all of these things I learned the hard way. And I will hopefully translate some of that to the group here, that you don't make the same mistakes that I did. But again, I'm really privileged. Again, I'm local to Chattanooga. I want to thank Alex and the rest of the presenters here and the organizers for putting this thing on. It's awesome to see this in Chattanooga. Appreciate it.